welcome to my childhood bedroom, and also welcome to Design for Equitable Systems. And today we're talking about an introduction to co-creation. So we've actually moved forward to another stage in the design process. We're currently going to be prototyping our ideas and starting to make them happen and test them with the community. So it's exciting time to see all the work that you've done, all the efforts that you put in, transformed into these really amazing opportunities. And your readings today will contextualize that. We're bringing in our friends, the Liberatory Design Toolkit and Equity-Centered Community Design Field Guide, and they'll help you to frame the ideas. And then I'm bringing in another tool, which kind of have a combination of tools because there wasn't a perfect reading, to talk about journey mapping and how that can help you understand the context of design work. Remember last time we talked about responsible concept selection. So this was a process of taking all the ideas you've gotten from your ideation session, starting to parse them down, understand their context, and then come out with a solution that you can move forward on. So I went through many techniques, which I won't be able to cover in the review, but just to remember, how do we guide the parsing down conversation? These questions will help you to kind of learn what you brainstormed, what's missing, and understand the context and biases that might have come into play. Remember also that an important process at this stage is to identify criteria for success. Now, throughout the design process, you've learned what people need, you've learned what people are wanting, desiring, where they've been failed, and these criteria are thus building off of how do you ensure this project is successful, and how do you ensure that it will no longer fail those that are most vulnerable. So make sure that you have those criteria set up so that you're ready to do this process in the most equitable way possible. Remember, we talked about some techniques for parsing down ideas, but they're eventually getting you to a strategy of consensus-based decision-making. You're trying to ensure that you're deciding on the best idea, and that takes, working with others, voting, parsing down to get you to the point where you have concepts and interventions to move forward on. And once you have those interventions, and this is kind of a setup for today, as we talked about last time, you're really trying to get an understanding of what at the basic level will this do? What will the impact look like, and how will equity be created? How are you even going to measure success and see that this is tracking? Any risks coming up in this idea? Any things that might go wrong? And that was kind of the risk mapping tool that I showed you that you can use. And then you'll be, what can be improved to make the idea more resilient? So now we're kind of able to set the framework for this intervention. So journey mapping is going to be an essential technique for contextualizing the intervention in the lived experiences that we now understand in the community. And what is this journey map? So this is a kind of an understanding of individual experiences, community experiences, and they're showcasing a life's path. Now in the reading, you'll see one about a veteran's life. So seeing a veteran before they go to service, while they're in service, and after service. What are those different intervention points at which they're struggling with something or could need some intervention, meaningful intervention to help them? You can kind of show ways of thinking in current realities, especially if you did your interviewing. You're going to be able to capture some insights to how people experience these problems. What does it feel to deal with these problems? And it's a tool for allowing you to identify critical points for the chosen intervention to benefit the individual. And that reading also talked about the libraries as a tool, but whatever you ideated on, you just can think about many, many tools that can be used and where they could intervene. What this is useful for, because you have to know it with any tool, where can it be used. It's really good for showcasing perspective and new experiences for empathy. Now, while in the past we've questioned empathy, if this is designed with people most affected, you'll ensure that you're capturing stories and capturing experiences, finding those pause points for intervention. You're highlighting real life experience. You're not just making up things on the fly. You're really seeing what people are living through and seeing where you can kind of have those meaningful touch points. Authentically communicating, you can initiate more community engagement as they can understand these stories as they might mirror their own. And again, implementing your interventions that you've decided on, where can they kind of fit in? So your process. So once you've decided on a kind of intervention area or an area you want to explore, it's kind of that's where you've kind of scoped it to the context. So you're going to kind of need an understanding of, with this intervention, what context is it going to exist in? What space is it going, what story is going to kind of be the main driver of where this intervention will have to come in. Understand the individual experiences you're mapping through focus interviews, so focusing it on lived experience that you've gained through engaging with communities. You can map out those experiences, and traditionally it'll be maybe a kind of representation of several people's experiences. Once you've identified the touch points, you can then sketch experiences with and without the intervention. So you can see, at this point, if this happened, will the person be able to deal with it? But then with the intervention that's very systematic, addressing those problems, how could they improve their life and improve their well-being? So here's kind of a roadmap. So 8 points maybe is not enough for your chosen solution, chosen intervention, but this just gives you a starting point. So at the top, you're going to kind of list the current realities. So you're going to say, like, what is it like to be at this point? What is it like to experience this? And then in the little question box, you can start to list what an intervention would look like at this specific point in that lived experience, and even start to say what the impact could be. What could person positively benefited in this part of their journey? And you can start to see kind of the different points at which an intervention can come into play. And this can be done for many different individuals and in many different contexts. It can even be used as an organizing tool. If you were thinking about the journey of a legislator, you could even think about, at what point would an intervention best convince them to support your cause. So now that we have journey mapping, we can start to think about co-creation and working with communities and techniques to do this effectively. And that technique that we'll speak about the most is rapid prototyping. Now, this is a stage because it's allowing for inclusion and a radical inclusion, basically. You're trying to lower the barriers to creativity as much as possible, and this rapid prototyping is the methodology to do that. You are iterating in a way, just like trying to learn more. How do individuals interact with this intervention, whether it's a physical copy, a written out program, something quick that you can show to get those feelings of this is actually something that I want and I need, and it will be an intervention that has meaningful impact. You can work to answer questions about the concept and test assumptions. So very useful technique, and is part of this social justice work because sometimes we spend so much time building our projects, trying to ensure perfection, but that keeps us from being able to do meaningful work. So working quickly, but in a focused way of learning really helps us to make the better change that we want to see in the world. So your challenge, you're trying to quickly build something that does not require a lot of explanation. How can you engage a team meaningfully to create something that can show your ideas and allow you to sort of see what can meaningfully be done? So here's the steps that you'll take. First, you're going to need to gather your necessary tools. And I kind of broke this up so that you can kind of see that there's going to be different tools you need to consider depending on the type of intervention you're working on. So if it's a physical intervention, you might need to gather, everyday items so that you can be physically building things with your community, something that's cheap and affordable so that anyone could be a part of it. If it's a policy/program, maybe you'll need a lot of whiteboards, a lot of stickies, a lot of paper in order to draw out the idea, maybe do some sketched out role plays, which can showcase what this intervention could look like. If it's a digital tool, you can use maybe a plotting out software, as easy as PowerPoint. PowerPoint could be used as your tool to create the interface, to then show people, would this be a meaningful interface for you? You can use more complex softwares if you know how to use them, but PowerPoint is one that, Google Slides is freely available and everyone can kind of access it if they have internet. So once you have all those tools ready, you can bring together community members, and if possible, bring those who went to the ideation session, bring those that have been a part of this process and get them involved. Then you're going to define the assumptions that you have for this prototype. What are the things that you are testing for? What are the things that you're thinking this thing will need to have? And what things are important for it to have to be a successful intervention, as we kind of talked about last time in preparing for this stage. And next, you're going to work to split members of the impacted community into teams and commit to rapid prototyping. Now, you don't need to do this, but this stage could allow you to gain multiple iterations of what this prototype could look like, and again, gain multiple feedback areas from different people. So, something to try. You can allow the teams time to prototype and determine based on complexity of the intervention. If it's maybe a simple physical device, maybe it takes an hour. But if you're plotting out a program or curriculum, maybe it's a few hours of testing, and maybe it's a few iterations of that test. So really mark it based on the community's availability and your own intentions in that space. Once you've done the work, if you have multiple teams, you'll come together to discuss, evaluate the concepts brought up based on kind of the prompt, the general concept that was identified and sketched out, and find ways that you can put together these different components to kind of build one thing that you can start to put out to the community to gain feedback. And once you finally are done, again, that's what I said, getting ready to gain feedback, define your testing and feedback audience in order to figure out who you need to engage to make some meaningful difference. And here's some questions that you should just consider in this process. As always, we need to be self-reflective and think about our biases, think about what we might not be seeing. So think who benefits the most and who benefits the least. And if at all, is anyone harmed? Would someone, be a target if this goes wrong? And how do you make sure that you're mitigating that risk that we said is very important to mitigate, especially when we're doing justice work? Think about the consequences. As we showed you the technique last week about consequence mapping, you can refer back to that, reuse it for your iterated prototypes to think about what might this do for the community. Think about your assumptions. As always, this is the biases. These are the ways that we think the world works, and they always come into play at every stage of the design process. We must question them and make sure that they are properly analyzed. And finally, who's at the table? This theme of this course, who designed and constructed it, it has to always, you have to have people that know the context, who are closest to the problems. And maybe, again, with multiple teams, you can ensure that you're getting all those different perspectives, which are always critical in designing for equity and justice. And some best practices, last stage of this process, and how to work. How do you do this to ensure that you're moving forward in a supportive and equitable way that makes people feel excited to be at this stage where you're creating something from people's ideas? Make sure that you're determining whether the prototype should communicate the idea or recreate the experience. And that comes with, do you need the physical items, or are you creating more of an organizing strategy or a program or some kind of communication campaign that will require different tools? Make sure that you're not investing a ton of time resources because, at this stage, you're really figuring it out. And if in a testing mindset, you should try to make the prototype in as little time as possible. It seems counterintuitive as we think we need to be, again, perfect. But spending little time allows us to move quickly and allows us to do multiple stages and be able to find the ways that our ideas are flawed once we do the testing, which we'll talk about later this week. And build it with everyday tools that people know how to use, especially in the access and inclusion space. If we start to use too many complex tools, we might exclude those that might have brilliant ideas and new ways of thinking about these chosen concepts, but would be excluded because they can't use the tools we're choosing to use. Again, make sure it's quick. You're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to get your ideas heard and seen by community members so you can best support them and build systematic interventions, which take many, many stages of work to get to. Know that you're trying not to waste your resources. Finally, I know while systems are huge and scary and throughout this course probably have felt overwhelming, it's always important that we can start small to build big. It's, sometimes we want to tackle the entire world's problems. But with this prototyping, we can start to chip away at the problem, start to really think about the needs, start to be able to make interventions at the need points and see that our change is happening. We can use those successes to continue moving forward to make the change we want to see in the world. So some closing thoughts. We build to think during prototyping. Prototyping is not to make the most beautiful technology. It's to learn what people think, learn how people interact with new interventions, and see ways that we can make them better to better support equity and inclusion. So your next readings will be about testing, and we'll look about equitable evaluation as well, which I'm really excited about. I found this reading, and I'm very thrilled to talk about it. So get pumped, and as always, email me if you need me, and I'll see y'all later this week.